Welcome to the Westside Barbell podcast. My co-host today is Burley Hawk. Burley, thank you for being here.
Good to be here, Tom.
Today, I want us to dive deep into the conjugate method, specifically for high school football. And for those of you who don't know, Louie has been working with all ranges of football coaches from high school, collegiate to the pros. He consulted for many NFL teams. So we've had a lot of football players come in and out of Westside Barbell, a lot of coaches come in and out of Westside Barbell. When I first came here, he had the two Kerrs, John and Josh Kerr. He had two kids walk on to Ohio State, and then the numerous NFL teams that came in and out of Westside. So we have a very strong understanding of strength training and education for the high school, the collegiate, and the pro level. But this episode, I wanted to dive into the importance of strength training in football, the conjugate method, how it can be used, and kind of give an overview with that. So Burley, from your point of view, how does strength training specifically enhance football performance?
Well, it really enhances all aspects of football performance, whether we're talking about, speed, explosive power, absolute strength, durability, resilience, obviously resistance to injury. You can never, bulletproof somebody, but the stronger the athlete gets, more resilient they get. So as much as, everybody harps on speed, I totally agree. Speed training is important. These athletes have to train with a barbell.
And the core fundamental is get strong. Like a stronger athlete, an increase in absolute strength is like a rising tide. It raises all ships. Mm-hmm. And to avoid strength training and maximal strength training, and we'll get into it later on, is a huge flaw in the system, because you have to be training maximally. You have to at least give them a good base. But if you're omitting absolute strength from your program, you are missing the key to raising all other strengths along the way. Yep. Then when we break down football, what do you think when you think of the physical demands?
Well, I think the first thing is that obviously athletes have to be durable. I mean, it's a game that's violent. You can't, it's so dynamic, you can't predict the exact position or the exact angle of the hit. Athletes could get hit in the, side of the knee and get a knee taken out. All sorts of things that could happen on a football field. So ultimately what we want to do is we want to build an athlete that's durable, resilient, strong, explosive, is able to match force with force. If you got a guy coming to take your head off across the field, you want to be able to brace and, absorb that hit. That goes for running backs, goes for linebackers, goes for quarterbacks. I think a lot of times coaches try to break training down positionally, not realizing that the violence that occurs in the field occurs with everybody on the field. So all these athletes need to be strong and durable.
And to approach training more broad spectrum. If you become too specific, then you get into that aspect of a groove to where you're good in one dimension. Yep. But when most injuries occur, it comes from getting outside of what you're used to or getting outside of what force your body can take.
Yeah. Well, in particular at the high school level, these guys just need an introduction to the basic barbell lifts within the intensities and velocities that are relevant to certain special strengths. But ultimately, it's just at the high school level, it's just getting these guys in the door and teaching them the right way to train. And then just obviously a lot of this, because these guys are new and beginners, it instantly transfers over the field because this is the first exposure to any sort of performance training they're going to have.
And for all you high school coaches, to give you an introduction of what we mean by the conjugate method, it's a system that every week you know how strong, how fast your athletes are, what weaknesses are there that need to be improved upon, and it gives you a very fast feedback loop, and you can adapt training that day rather than waiting for a whole block to go through before making changes. Yep. And it's based on 3 methods. The maximal effort method, where you're lifting the heaviest weight on that day possible. We usually go up to 1 rep max. There's some exercise we'll do a 3 or a 5, but primarily you're lifting the heaviest weight you can on that day. The dynamic effort method, which is we're training speed strength, where we're trying to lift a submaximal weight as fast as possible. And both of those days are followed by the repeated effort, which is another name for accessory exercises, to where we're using accessory exercises to target weaknesses, make them stronger, or improve endurance, strength, etc., whatever is needed. But the system is based on those 3 methods. And if we go into the maximal effort method, can you go into an overview on the importance of it, Burley?
Yeah, so the maximal effort method is going to improve absolute strength. And like as we said, absolute strength, we consider at Westside Barbell the king strength. Absolute strength essentially will increase an athlete's ability to express explosive power, express speed, It impacts work capacity, stronger athletes capable of doing more work. When it comes to any sort of performance training, and obviously it can't always be included during the in-season training, but in the off-season training, there's not an athlete on earth, specifically football players, that can afford to avoid absolute strength training, max effort training.
And it's also an opportunity to set goal setting for your athlete to where you're chasing 5-pound PRs. And even if you don't get a PR, like we're always chasing that stimulus, but it's teaching them goal setting, which is huge. And as coaches, you don't want your athletes failing. No. Like you want them to get the stimulus, but cut it off before it becomes too much. Yep. And I think this ties in with discussing some of the misconceptions about max effort being dangerous. Like, there is no exercise that's inherently dangerous. It's the coach. And you have to know your athletes inside and out. You have to know what you're dealing with. But a 1-rep max is not dangerous. It is only dangerous if you let them do it with terrible technique, or you don't do any coaching, or they have no baseline level of strength coming into it, or no experience under their barbell. Mm-hmm. So that is important. Set your foundation, set your base. And it's very important when you are working up to a heavy single that you set your standards of technique, that you don't compromise that, and you make smart jumps. Mm-hmm. Here, normally we work up, after we warm up, we got 7 jumps to get from roughly about 50% to 100%. We'll start with bigger jumps at the start, smaller jumps towards the end. And that way, the athlete, one, is the developing understanding of how much weight the body can handle, giving their central nervous system a chance. And as they progress as an athlete, they can start taking bigger jumps towards the end. But it's important to work up to a 1-rep max. We're trying to chase that stimulus no matter what. And you brought up a good point. If you are in season, yes, you can treat your games as a maximum effort because you're going all out. But if you're not starting, there is no reason why you should not be doing maximum effort, because then when you get called up, you've been training, you've been chasing that stimulus, you've been getting that. So when you get game day, like, you are more ready compared to someone who hasn't. Would you agree with that?
Very good point.
Moving on from the maximal effort method, we'll go into the dynamic effort method and talk about the role of speed, strength, and explosive power, how that translates to on-field success.
Yeah, so it's simple. I mean, the dynamic effort method, the maximal effort method link up very well, obviously, with the absolute strength development. We're increasing the amount of force that an athlete can generate. With the dynamic effort method, we're decreasing the amount of time it takes for the athlete to generate that level of force. So we're focused on rate of force development. It's obviously what's included with the football program, and we follow very similar Westside parameters, 12x2, 10x2, 8x2, similar percentages. There are times with certain athletes, particularly beginners, we might have to bring percentages down 5 to 10% to ensure that bar speed's correct. And that is something that needs to be understood, is that the training percentages set markers, but it's not locked in, it's not set in stone. So if you identify an athlete that's moving at, say, suboptimal velocity, we adjust the weight to make sure we're meeting velocity parameters. So included in the ebook that will be going out with the high school football training programs, there are instructions on how to coach those things. Max effort, dynamic effort. And that is one thing, dynamic effort, you need to really look out for, is for fatigue management to be navigated successfully, we need to ensure that the velocity parameters are met, because if they're not, athletes are training at a higher level of effort to where max effort and the dynamic effort can turn into max effort and heavy efforts, which ultimately leads to athletes becoming excessively fatigued.
And dynamic effort is only as accurate as your max effort.
Yep.
If you don't have max efforts, then you are just estimating. Mm-hmm. And for some, you might be overestimating, for others, underestimating. That's why it's important to get your 1-rep maxes. And when you're choosing your dynamic effort movements, and it's based on a squat variation, a deadlift variation, a bench variation, it's 50%, 55%, and 6% of barbell weight, plus 25% accommodating resistance. And to reemphasize what Burley said, these are just outlines, like they're guidelines, should I say, to where you can adjust as need be, but you need to have that 1-rep max. Yeah. Because if not, you are not going to get the right stimulus. You're not going to be able to understand, well, are they moving this weight fast enough? For instance, if they're moving 50% way too slow, you can take down that bar weight, and you have to understand we need to put more effort into recruitment, force development. Yep. And it's all objective. None of this is based on theoreticals. So max effort ties into dynamic effort that way. And dynamic effort, to me, is one of the most important training sessions, especially if you're in season. Mm-hmm. If you're in season, you can do dynamic effort and basically lose no strength throughout.
Oh, yeah. So totally solve detraining. If anything, I would say for an athlete, the dynamic effort method is probably the method that they'll have the most experience with throughout the training year, because it's never out of the plan.
And you brought it up, but one of the most common mistakes we see is using excessive weight instead of focusing on velocity. Yep. And that's where you have to educate your athletes. We'll have athletes here who want to lift more weight, but two things will happen. One, they'll slow down their lift, and two, they'll slow down the group. So you're losing that conditioning effect of that.
Yep.
And you want to set that culture and the parameters really not set in stone, but have those set so the athletes know why they're doing it. Give them an education too.
And if I may add, there might be times where a current PR, in max effort does not exactly work well with the percentages. For instance, say if an athlete recently had hit a squat PR of 500 pounds, well, they might not be able to move 75% of 500 pounds at the proper velocity. So don't always get so caught up in that the percentage has to match the current max effort single. Focus on, and nowadays with the availability of tendo units and velocity tracking devices, focus on the bar velocity, not so much the bar weight.
And we're in the age of technology. Use technology as a feedback loop. Don't let it dictate the workouts. Yep. And then be careful when you're showing this to your athletes, because then they may become obsessed with speed actually than focusing on what the workout's intended to be. Mm-hmm. So use them meaningfully. You don't need to use them all the time. We very rarely use them, but we think we have a relatively good eye of what's fast, what's not. But use them as a feedback mechanism, not as a crutch, not as something that's going to dictate your training, because you'll, one, kill the culture, two, the athlete will not know that they're going to chase something that's not going to be relevant to carry over to their game.
What was it about the tendo unit that Louie had once said when they brought it into the gym? I think he said it turned into a competition.
It did, yeah.
To where guys were trying to beat each other with the times.
And then they had two tendo units, one on the top, one on the bottom, measuring eccentric, concentric speed, to where it can easily become a crutch. Yeah. And I'm not saying we're against sports science or technology, but it should be within your feedback loop and only use pertinent data, but don't let it dictate what you're doing. Because sometimes someone could be slow because they're slow.
A rough day at practice the day before,
And
things happen.
That's another thing. I was working with an NFL athlete when I first got here, and obviously my understanding of NFL and positions was pretty limited, to say the least. But I was using tendo, their speed, and they were very slow. But I had no feedback loop with with the coaches. And we focused on that. And his performance in the field was getting worse because all we're doing was chasing the speed rather than focusing on everything else. And I told Lou, and Lou's like, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah. And I'm like, so I have to go tell the athlete, obviously I got the heave-ho, rightly so. But that's where I'm like, you have to compare the athlete's speed to themselves. Are they getting faster compared to themselves rather than comparing them to the most fastest people on the team? Agreed. It's very important to individualize the results too. Mm-hmm. That a little bit of speed development on that athlete compared to their pre-testing could be huge onto the field. And at the end of the day, we are trying to get athletes to be better, more resilient in their sport. We're not trying to make powerlifters in the gym. Yeah, we're not trying to make weight heroes, right? But we learn from powerlifting. Yep. And you can learn a lot from powerlifters, and people should learn from powerlifting to bring it into their weight room. Because if you touch a barbell and you don't talk to powerlifting or understand how they utilize technique, setup, and accessories, well, then you're missing a huge part of training. Yeah. But remember, context is key, and don't lose fact of the adaptable nature of the conjugate method. Yep. It allows you to have freedom. And some people, they don't like that because it's not as rigid. It is very easy to work within a linear parameters because it's simple. This takes a little bit of work, but it gives you the freedom to do whatever you want whenever it's necessary. Yeah. It frees the mind and it challenges the mind at the same time. For sure. Then we'll move on from dynamic effort to the repeated effort method. So how does the repeated effort method training help enhance work capacity, address weaknesses, and for some to add muscle mass? Well, it really becomes the foundation of all the training. Like Louie used to say, the 80-20 rule, 80% of our exercises are going to be made up of accessory exercises. That's where the bulk of the training volume is going to come from. So that's where we're obviously, increased repetition counts, increased set counts, increased volume. So we're going to increase work capacity. Also through that and really at the high school level, this can be for all athletes. Very few athletes are going to have the exposures to the type of work that we're going to be doing. So you're going to have changes in physical composition that will be, positive in nature. Athletes will be in better shape, lose body fat. For some athletes that might be even carrying excess body fat or excess weight, you can get an increase in their speed just by, getting rid of some excess body weight. So when the type of work that the repeated effort method calls for is the more, it's anaerobic in nature, but it also is challenging to the aerobic system if we keep it dense as we have it over with the athletes.
Generally, our rest times on accessory work is going to be anywhere between a minute to maybe, a minute 20 at the most, sometimes even as short as 30 seconds if we're really pushing density. But yeah, focus on work capacity, improving physical composition, and just moving weight.
And then utilize the day as a guideline for your sets and reps and intensity. For instance, on dynamic effort, most of our athletes here will do a combined dynamic effort, which is upper and lower in the same workout, followed by accessory work. We will keep the intensity and density pretty high, but the weight is not going to be at a maximum level. It's going to be an achievable level in that range of maybe 70 to 80%. Mm-hmm. When you go to max effort, you don't want to lose the aspect of lifting heavy weights because we're trying to get strong. Yep. So there's a trade-off, right? It can still be intense, but the density is not going to be like dynamic effort. No. So it's a rule of thumb. So you might be doing something of 3 sets of 8. Mm-hmm. And if an athlete sees 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 6, they're going to realize intensity is high because I need more recovery to lift the most weight. And if you want hypertrophy, obviously the reps are going to be higher. But utilize your days as a guideline of how to set up accessories, sets, and reps. Yep. If we had a bunch of D-line guys come in here and they're doing a max effort, can you run through what a standard max effort lower body day would look like?
Well, we're going to start with the main exercise. That's going to be a squat bench. It's going to be a squat deadlift or a good morning. Within, like Tom said, within 7 sets. If you have a stronger athlete, it could be up to 9 sets, but most athletes could be within that 7-set range. We're going to work up to a top set single. As Tom was saying, we're not so much focused on lifting to the point your eyes are, popping out of your head and we're trying to nosebleed powerlifter crap. It's more or less that we're trying to drive neural adaptation via exposure training intensity. So really it's the heaviest weight the athlete can lift for that day. And when we particularly work with athletes, we're not so much concerned with consistent PRs like every week. We want to see an upward trend in PRs over the course of 8 to 12 weeks. But the big thing is getting that heavy rep in, neural adaptation. And then after that, we'll obviously segue into the accessory work. We start with a primary accessory exercise that's going to be multi-joint in nature, generally trained at a higher higher intensity level. It could be anywhere between 3 to 5 sets of, 3 to 5 to 8 reps. Obviously, and that's another thing too with the training. The rep counts, the set counts will ultimately dictate the loading. We don't usually prescribe exact training loads for accessory exercises for the simple fact that it is difficult to judge every athlete's level of fatigue or assume every athlete's exit fatigue after the main exercise. So what I would recommend on all accessory exercises is train each set with the heaviest weight you possibly can while remaining technically sound and completing all sets and reps to standard. That's going to ensure that that's a big thing that people need to focus on with our work is if you really, the max effort matters, the dynamic effort matters, but if you're not putting in proper intent and execution to your accessory work, you're leaving a bulk of work on the table that needs to be done and you're holding yourself back tremendously.
80%, like you said.
80% of the work. So, the primary accessory, like I said, multi-joint nature, higher intensity, lower rep counts. Then we move into secondary accessory exercises. Those are going to be both multi-joint and single joint type exercises. Those are going to be a little bit higher rep counts, 3 to 4 sets. Could be anywhere between 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 15. Some even go into 15 to 20 or 25 plus reps. And then after that, there are times where if athletes, football players a little different because they're probably going to have an outside conditioning program already going on. The ebook and the programs that we'll be putting out has a conditioning, 4th day of conditioning within it. But if athletes need extra conditioning, if you got some out of shape guys, at the end, after the secondary accessory exercise, that's perfect time to go do some basic GPP, sled pull, wheelbarrow walks, cinder block walks, whatever you want to do.
And to give some frame of reference for everyone listening, within Westside, Burley and myself, we work with a lot of coaches, especially within football, and we hear the questions, we try to help them problem solve, and max effort comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. And we're talking to them, we're like, how heavy is heavy enough? Like, what are you chasing? In powerlifting, you're looking for a PR, because you're looking for a PR on the platform, and it's very objective to where you squatted 800 pounds, you're going 805. It's progress. Mm-hmm. And recently, we just had a Conjugate Tactical seminar here, and Jason Gussick put in a very good line that I am scoundrelly stealing from him, and it is, we're lifting max effort to, we want to avoid the point of diminishing returns for an athlete. And what does that mean? That it's negatively affecting your sport. Mm-hmm. It's negatively affecting your training. Yep. Now, you have to put parameters on that, because if they're new to this, the first 3 to 6 weeks, you're going to adapt to it. We're always chasing adaptation, avoiding accommodation. But the point of diminishing returns is a really good guideline to where if the training you're doing is not making them a more resilient, better athlete on the field, then something is wrong. And that could be the difference of someone having a 500-pound squat and chasing a 550 squat, but it's killing everything else, to where use the point of diminishing returns as a guideline to where, like, okay, it is now negatively affecting the athlete in the sport they're doing. We're chasing results. We want the athlete to have the best chance for skill acquisition, because skill is going to kill on the field. And the more you can train, the more skill you can learn, and the more time you have to recovery, etc. So use the point of diminishing returns as your guideline when working with athletes. In powerlifting, yes, there is a point of diminishing returns, but you're chasing that PR. You're chasing that meet. You're trying to get better results the next meet you get. When you're a football player, you want to be the most dominant football player on the field. And if something's taken from that, something needs to be adjusted. So we went through maximal effort method, dynamic effort method, and repeated effort method. Max effort really sets everything up. It's your guiding star. If your accessories are going right, it allows for dynamic effort to be accurately programmed in terms of 50, 55, and 60% bar weight, plus 25% accommodating resistance. And accommodating resistance is in the form of bands or chains. We utilize bands a lot here, but chains are really good for stability. If you have people who've got problem unracking your bar and getting set, chains can be more advantageous. Bands are unbelievable for intent. It allows you to be really aggressive with the bar and put everything into the bands, and they'll kick it back to you. And there's huge carryover with that. And the repeated effort method is what we use for setting sets and reps for accessories. And one thing that I don't want to keep harping on about it, but when you're selecting accessory exercises are means to deliver force. There's thousands of them. Rotate in ones, new ones, get rid of old ones, and keep what's useful, and have a list of those. But don't think this one exercise is going to completely change your player. It's broad spectrum. You look at it on a macro view, rotate in new ones. And I urge you coaches to use the exercises first before you give it to your athlete, because we have access to so much crap on social media that this is a really hard exercise. Well, it might be hard because it's just hard. There's no transfer of exercise into the sport. But just look at exercises as ways to deliver force to the body. Some will be great, some not so much, but keep that list growing of what is useful. And it does you no good to do stuff that's of no use.
What does Verkhoshansky say? Any idiot can make another idiot tired?
Yeah. And look at bondage, look at stuff that transfer into your sport. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make better football players. And whatever your sport is, the athletes, if they're more resilient and they're getting better at their sport, you're doing a good job. Then there's two systems that we utilize here. There's the 4-day system, which is traditional, which is max effort lower, followed by max effort upper, dynamic effort lower, dynamic effort upper. Or we have the combined dynamic effort day, which is the same max effort lower, max effort upper, and both upper and lower done in one session. You can make arguments for both. Like, I like using the 3-day system because it gives an extra day back to the athletes, so they have stuff for skill acquisition. But if you're using a 4-day system, getting good results, there is nothing wrong with it. It's tried and true. Louie uses it with all his athletes, and if you look at football, there is a good translation over to that 4-day system into it too. Let's touch on plyometrics.
Okay.
So we went over kind of the core foundational aspects of the conjugate method. How would one implement plyometrics effectively into football training?
Well, it's real simple. I think guys get a little too in the weeds with it. It's just basic, especially for the high school level. They need to be introductory level to where it's just basic bounds, basic jumps. And even if you have, athletes capable of high levels of performance, they can just do more. They can just jump higher. You don't have to get ultra creative with your exercise selection to yield results. So I like to start with just standard bounding, lateral bounding, single leg bounds. And then with the box jump, standard box jump, seated box jump, you can even get to obviously the single leg box jump. Drops, we don't do a ton of drops, although there is some validity. Of course, there's validity to death drops. But other than that, we just keep it basic. Like in the high school program that's going to be released here soon, it's basic introductory work for the plyometric days. It's going to be a conditioning plyometric day where you're going to have some conditioning, some basic plyometric introductory level, and then some basic abdominal trunk rotational work. And it's pretty simple, straight to the point. easy for beginners to understand and execute, and can also yield great gains for the most advanced of athletes.
And to us, plyometrics are so important, they deserve their own training session.
Yeah.
Now, there's some coaches out there who don't have the luxury of an extra day. Well, then you can either put them in at the start or the end of a workout.
Yeah.
If you put them at the end of a workout, they're going to do plyometrics through fatigue, so it's probably not going to be the best representation of plyometrics, so you can do them at the start.
That's why we split it up.
Yep. But if you're able to program in specific plyometric training sessions, you're going to have huge carryover, because now, again, the athlete is given the task, here is what you have to execute on. And when you're in the weight room doing max effort dynamic effort method, you know what the purpose is of that day.
Yeah.
So again, it's teaching them, like, here's the purpose, what we're going for. If you have to mix them in, just be smart of where you do it, split them up, and keep it simple.
Yeah. I've had experience in the past work with athletes that we needed to consolidate the plyometric work onto a dynamic effort day. And I will say there is, it can be useful to just perform the plyometrics after a dynamic effort squat workout, and then go right into the plyos, then go into your dynamic effort deadlifting.
Yeah. And you just put them in as accessories.
Yeah, exactly.
And to give a frame reference, your dynamic effort should be finished within an hour.
Yeah.
Your max effort should be finished within an hour.
Yeah.
Like that's the amount of time you should be putting it into it. They should not be 2 or 3 hours.
I will add, though, if you are working with beginners, there might, particularly for the high school football level, it might be some extended time because you're going to be dealing with teaching movements. But for the athletes that are competent, 45 minutes to an hour on dynamic effort, and an hour, it may be an hour 20 at the most on a max effort if guys are going really, everybody's PR in that day working up. But yeah, man, an hour is right about the right time.
Let's move on to getting into the application and program design, and kind of go over the importance of customizing the conjugate method for the athletes to where the freedom it gives. Can you go over just say some basic advantages of the conjugate method over other methods?
Oh, I mean, well, if we really want to go over all, we'll be here all day, but just a few of them is the ability, especially if you're working with an individual, is to really tailor the training to the individual's needs. We have a variety of special exercise variations that we can use at any given time. So we can essentially evaluate an athlete, find weaknesses, find issues with movement, all the way down to the specific joint angles where we can manipulate exercises, limit ranges of motion, do whatever we need to do to drive specific adaptations from specific inputs. So when it comes to our style of training, there's really no situation. We can always meet the athlete exactly where they're at, and we can always bring the athlete up to that next level. The athlete doesn't have to get with our program. We got to get with their program. We evaluate, we meet the athlete where they're at, and performance improves. And it really is that simple. I know the other thing that our system does well that other systems don't is obviously we train everything concurrently in a conjugate fashion. So instead of detraining, instead of having to focus long specific times on specific strengths, we are able to develop all relevant special strengths simultaneously. For instances like off-season football training, that trumps all other aspects of training because we're more efficient and effective in a limited amount of training time than any other training system. So if you're a football coach where you got 8 weeks to where these guys have, in the summertime, 6 to 8 weeks of barbell training time, if you want a system that's going to be the most effective in that amount of time, I would bet anybody to try to prove me wrong that you cannot find a better system than the conjugate method. Matter of fact, I will say this, that most intelligent coaches nowadays, whether they'll claim it by saying conjugate or not, are all using a form of the conjugate method.
Fatigue management during the system is relatively simple.
Simple, but it may be the most important aspect of it.
And it is, you have to recognize signs of overtraining. Yep. And a lot of this happens when you have beginners coming in because you take too big of a bite out of the apple. Mm-hmm. You have to get your core fundamentals in. Yep. If they've never touched a barbell, you have to spend time giving them a good education on technique, a good education on the weight room itself, how to spot, how to load, how to execute correctly. Even understanding the difference of bars. Yep. If you have a difference of a squat bar, bench bar, and deadlift bar, you have to educate the athletes on that. Yep. And then you have to educate them on intent. Because a lot of athletes have no idea how to express maximal effort or true intent in that. So that could be 2 weeks, it could be 6 weeks, it could be 8 weeks, but don't go into this full hog and expect a beginner to be able to hit a really intense and dense dynamic effort method and come out the better of it. You have to realize where they're at and give them enough time to understand core principles of lifting weights. Yep. And even before you go to box squat, you should know how to free squat.
Oh, 100%.
Like you have to know all these different aspects. Yes. And before you put in too many variations of the main movements, have a high IQ of the actual bench, squat, and deadlift.
Yeah.
Then everything else will fall into place. Because if not, you're going to leave huge gaping holes as they develop as an athlete. And high school coaches, you are one of the most important strength coaches an athlete will ever have.
Yeah.
Because you're giving them their foundational understanding of a weight room. When athletes come in here, we can tell if they've worked with a great coach because they slip in really well with our group here, and they got a core education of how to execute the exercises correctly, and it's hugely important. So if you set them up for success, when they get to college and if they make it up to the pro levels, they'll have a level foundation of the weight room and exercise execution that most won't. So don't underestimate your importance of developing these athletes. Spend time at the beginner level, get the core understanding in, and teach them what a weight room is about.
Yep.
Teach them about the culture. And culture plays a whole part because the environment of the weight room is everything.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a culture, you will not have consistency. And if you don't have consistency, I don't care what system you use, it's not going to work. No. You have to set that culture, set the pace, and let the athletes know what's expected of them in your weight room.
Yeah. And
teach them to work within groups.
Yep.
Because if you work within groups, then the athletes will start self-coaching. It allows you to observe and analyze and actually give back good information. And it takes pressure off you. If you have 50 athletes in the gym and there's only 4 of you there and they don't have an education, it's going to be chaos. But if you can make your athletes mini coaches,
exactly,
then it's going to improve their knowledge. And wherever they go, they're going to understand how or what is a correct training system, what is not.
Yep. Get your freshmen up to speed. By the time they're seniors, they're the teacher.
Yeah.
Another thing I think that needs to be focused on with strength coaches, or even, the high school football coach that's also doubling as a strength coach, is you're a teacher. It's not just about clapping your hands and yelling, let's go. You have to teach these guys. They have to be competent. And the higher level of competency that all athletes in the gym have, the better the training outcomes are going to be. Like Tom said, if these guys are, executing an exercise, an accessory exercise needs to be done correctly, they need to know how to squat, they know how to box squat, get them competent in the basics.
So we cover an overview of the system for high school coaches. We are releasing an ebook directly on this. And for our listeners, the first 10 people to enter in the code Westside 212, they will get a free copy of this ebook. Remember, Westside, all lowercase, 212. The first 10 people to get in will get a free copy of this ebook. And any questions you have, please send them our way via training@westside-barbell.com. Hit us up through Instagram, through whatever way you interact. And remember, all coaches, all athletes are welcome to come visit here. We do not charge. We'll gladly spend as much time as necessary going through everything. But for now, Burley, appreciate the time.
Thank you, Tom.
And until next time, this is the Westside Barbell Podcast.